Chapter 3. Larrabee listens. The sheriff, Henry Larrabee, jerked up his head and listened. "That phone call is for me," he said instantly, as the first ring ended. 2 long and 3 short was the sheriff's ring on that country line, and the ring was ground out on a little crank, without summoning the assistance of a central. This first long ring was made in what might have been called a breathless fashion, the crank turning so swiftly in the middle of the motion that it produced only a rattle, not a true ring. "Not for you." "Not on a night like this," exclaimed his wife, as the good woman lifted her head and listened to the crashing of the rain against the roof. A second long ring had begun. "It's for me, right enough," said the sheriff, and rose to his feet. His daughter, Mary, rose, also, staring with excitement. "Oh, Dad, what could be happening? On a night like this, anything." There it goes. The second long ring had ended, and there followed 3 short rings in swift succession. The sheriff ran to the phone with great strides. "Hello," he called. "Sheriff Larrabee," said a woman's voice, "come quick, for there's been a murder here." "Who are you?" "Mrs. Zeller. Murder, ah." The last word was a half scream, and there was the sound of the telephone receiver dropping with a jerk. "You devil," the sheriff heard a man's voice shouting. Larrabee smashed up his own receiver. "Judd," he thundered. "Chris." His 2 sons answered with shouts from the upper part of the house. "Come down to me, quick. We got writing to do." "Henry," breathed his wife, stammering with fear, as she ran to him. "What is it?" "Where?" "Nothing," he answered sternly. "Don't hang on to me." "I got work, that's all." "When I'm gone, call the Gloucester house and get the Gloucester boys to ride toward the Zeller place, as fast as they can saddle and get underway. I'll meet 'em on the road. That's all. Don't ask questions. Just do what I say." Catching up his hat, he plunged from the house, the front door banging heavily behind him at the same time that the thunder of his son's feet began on the stairs above. Within 5 minutes they were in the saddle and racing out onto the muddy road. For they kept their horses in a shed near the house, ready for quick saddling at any hour of the day or night. Going up the first steep hill, they could talk. "I knew," said Judd, "that they'd be trouble some day in the Zeller house." "What's up?" "I dunno," answered the father. "Just heard a woman talking, and woman talk don't mean much usually. But it sure sounded like trouble was busted loose. Come on, lads." They had reached the crest of the hill, and now they lurched down into the valley at a reckless gallop, the horses sliding and slipping over the mud. Turning down the valley road, they presently came in view of a fire beneath a tree, and the sheriff headed straight for it. He swung out of the saddle in front of the tramp whom Jack Montaigne had seen earlier in the night. The tramp straightened up. He had been dozing, with his head almost dropped into the flame of the fire, and blinked at the new arrivals. The stern hand of the sheriff helped him to his feet, and he stifled his yawn. "Who are you?" asked the sheriff. "Slim," said the tramp. "Some call me Mississippi Slim. What else?" Disremember being called any other name. You come with me, Mississippi Slim. Judd, take him along and follow me to the Zeller place. This is the kind that know things, this Slim. Chris, come on with me. We got to ride hard. What can you get out of Slim? Asked Chris, as the two spurred on through the mud. Never can tell. But, if you ever step into my boots, boy, and get my job, you want to pick up them that look like Slim. If there's trouble around, they're most always downwind from it, and they know all about what's going on. They smell it before they see it, and they see it before us ordinary folks dream it. He concluded with a brief admonition. If Gus Zeller is mixed up in this killing, or whatever it is, that we're moving toward, and we come across him armed, don't waste no time arguing. If he shows fight, shoot, and shoot to kill. Handle him the way you'd handle a dog. He ain't no better, much. He had no chance to say more, for now they came to the house, where lights were burning in half of the windows. The sheriff's son was for a careful approach. The sheriff, however, scoffed at such an idea, and, advancing to the kitchen door, he cast it open and stepped into the presence of Gus Zeller and his mother. There was no need to fear Gus Zeller. He was a white-faced, trembling wreck of a man, shrinking against the wall. His mother was 10 times more formidable. Her eyes were gleaming, her hands clenched, and her whole attitude that of one ready to fight a great battle. "You sure come slow," she said to Larrabee. "Come upstairs, and you'll find it." There was something so ominous in that last syllable that even the sheriff, hardened by contact with crime and criminals, was a trifle shocked. As she took up the lamp, he swung in behind her, first ordering Gus Zeller to follow close to his mother. The order threw Gus into a sudden panic. "But what I got to do with it?" he asked tremulously. "I didn't do it. I swear I didn't do it, Sheriff." "I'm not saying you did," said the sheriff, disgusted by such cringing. "But you step along. I want to keep you under my eye." Gus skulked into line, glancing fearfully behind, as if anticipating a kick. They hurried up the stairs, the woman exclaiming eagerly, "You got to hurry, Sheriff. He left in a rush, and he'll be riding like a fiend all night." "Every minute counts, when you're trailing a gent like him." "Like who?" asked the sheriff. "I'll tell you about him after you see what he's done." They had hurried up to the floor of the second story of the house, and now they went straight behind Mrs. Zeller into the room, directly opposite the head of the stairs. They passed through a broken door. It had been splintered exactly in the center, and both halves were still attached, the one by its hinges and the other by the lock. Mrs. Zeller placed the lamp on the table near the center of the room. "There," she exclaimed dramatically, stepping back. "Nothing ain't been touched. There you are." They looked past her and saw, within the bright circle cast by the lamp, the figure of old Mr. Benton, lying on his back. Both hands were caught up to his breast, and he lay in a crimson pool that had run from a great wound in his head. The sheriff's son gasped, turned sick, and caught at the wall for support. But the sheriff himself showed not the slightest emotion. He merely leaned over the body, saying, never knowed he was that tall, never saw the old codger straightened out before. Now you've seen, said Mrs. Zeller shrilly, and now go get him. How long ago did he leave? Only 40 minutes by the clock. I been watching for you to come and watching the clock and thinking you'd never come. But he can't get far through the mud. 40 minutes, asked the sheriff, and he suddenly lost all eagerness. Well, let's hear about this. Get over here, will you? The last words were a savage roar, and they jerked Gus away from the door, toward which he had been sneaking. He stood back against the wall, shuddering, and his eyes twitched nervously from face to face. They ain't no call to talk to Gus like that, said Mrs. Zeller. He didn't do nothing. Perhaps not, said the sheriff, and, maintaining his aggravating calm, he produced a cud of chewing tobacco and worked off a comfortable bite between his front teeth. Say, Dad, broke in his son, you ain't going to stand around while he gets away. You talk less and listen more, said his father sagely. And you cotton onto this, before you start following a trail, find out where it leads. Now, Mrs. Zeller, what happened? He came here and made us. Began the woman. Who's he? Wouldn't give no name, that kind never do. Just said he was Jack. But Mr. Benton knew right off, the minute he laid eyes on him, that Jack was no good, and he said so right to his face. Well, Jack come and knocked open our kitchen door and asked for a meal and a bed. I didn't like the looks of him, but, when I told him there wasn't nothing for him here, he pulled a gun and started ordering us around. Ain't that right, Gus? Every single word, said the truthful Gus, rolling his eyes. Leave Gus out and talk to me. Afterward, Mr. Benton come down, like he mostly always does, to say a word or two to us before he goes to bed, him knowing that we're about the only friends he has in the world. The sheriff was now walking around the room, carelessly examining every corner of it. Mrs. Zeller followed him a pace or two in every direction he took, raising her voice, when he was far away, lowering it slightly, when he was close. He seen Jack, as I was saying, and Jack seen him. And while Benton was talking, Jack found out that the old man kept a pile of money in his chest in his room. You knew that, did you? Asked the sheriff, his back turned. Does it mean anything, my knowing it? Asked Mrs. Zeller. Go on. Finally, after Mr. Benton left, and Jack got through eating, he ate like he hadn't had food for a couple of days. Jack went up to bed, and he wouldn't be suited with nothing but Gus's own room, right next to Mr. Benton's room. Gus come downstairs afterward. I don't like the looks of him, says Gus. Nor his ways, says I. I'm going to sit up a while, says Gus, till Jack turns out his light. So we done it. We turned down the lamp in the kitchen, so it didn't make no light, just a glooming through the room. Then we waited and waited. All at once we heard a scream. Quick as a flash, Gus jumps to his feet. I been waiting for just that, he said, and starts running up the stairs, with me after him. Are you sure he went first? Asked the sheriff. Sure he did. Ain't he the man of the house? Go on, said Larrabee dryly. Gus tried the door, and it was locked. He took a run and broke the door open, you see, and there he found Mr. Benton lying, poor soul, with the chest open and the papers and everything all ruffled up, just the way you see. Nothing ain't been touched, not a thing is touched, Sheriff, since we first seen it. The chest in the corner of the room, indeed, was open, and a confusion of papers tumbled in it and on the floor around it. And then the door of Jack's room opens, and out he comes, rubbing his eyes like he'd just waked up, as though he could have slept through all that noise. "What's all the racket about?" he says. Well, he knew, the murderer. "Look here." She led the way to the window. Below it was the roof of the veranda that wound around the side of the house. Opposite was another window. "That window yonder opens into Jack's room, where he was supposed to sleep, the liar. What he done was to slip out of that window of his room and walk right across the roof and open this window and come in. He had first throttled the old man. You see." She advanced to the body and, leaning about it, pointed to some discolorations on the throat. There was something hideous in this eagerness, something unnatural for her sex. She was giving the scent of Jack Montaigne to the bloodhounds. "But the old boy died hard," went on Mrs. Zeller, stepping back again. "He wasn't dead, when Jack finished the throttling. He come to life, got his breath, and let out the screech that I heard down below and near stopped my heart beating. The sheriff, in the meantime, went to the window, leading onto the roof, and tried it. It opened frictionlessly and without sound under the lift of his hand. He turned, nodding, and marked the last of Mrs. Zeller's words with more apparent interest. And, when he screeched, Jack, who was getting the money out of the chest, turned around and hit him over the head with a chunk of wood from the fireplace. There it is. By the open hearth of the fireplace there was a pile of cut wood, each piece well over 2 feet in length. But one of these pieces lay in the middle of the floor, an ugly stain splotched about its sharp edge. "You sure he got the money?" asked the sheriff. "There ain't a cent in the chest," she exclaimed. "Look for yourself, the way I done." "I thought you didn't touch anything," he asked sharply. "Are you going to lay the stealing on me?" "What did Jack do then?" asked the sheriff. "When he seen the body, he tried to act surprised, but me and Gus drew back and looked at him. He tried to talk the thing off, but we just kept on looking. Pretty soon he run out of the room. Next thing we knew, he was jumping downstairs. He didn't hit more'n twice, all the way to the bottom. Outdoors he went, and the next minute he was tearing down the road on his hoss, riding west." "Thanks," said the sheriff. "What did he look like?" "Good looking, but mean." "About 5 feet 11, dark, straight-looking eyes, dark hair, about 30 years old, or less, gray around the temples." "Rides a gray hoss." "Gus went out and seen it in the barn, after Jack went to bed, or after he was in his room." "That's all I can think about, except that he looked like a killer." "Mr. Benton said so, right to his face." Said the sheriff, and raised his eyebrows. "Wait a minute," he added. "Here come the boys."